My son called me at 4:17 in the afternoon. I remember the time because I had just finished pinning my hair. I was standing at the bathroom mirror, the small one with the crack along the bottom left corner that I keep meaning to replace. I had on my blue dress, the one with the little pearl buttons down the front. I hadn't worn it in almost 2 years. I'd pressed it the night before and hung it on the door so it would be ready. We had dinner plans, 7 o'clock, a restaurant called Bellamy's over on Creston Avenue. Marcus had made the reservation himself. He'd called me 3 weeks prior and said, "Mama, I want to take you to dinner, just the 2 of us. It's been too long." And he was right. It had been too long. So I pressed that blue dress. I polished my good shoes. I even went down to the pharmacy and bought a new lipstick, a soft rose color, nothing too loud, because the old one had dried up somewhere in the back of my vanity drawer. The phone rang at 4:17. "Mama?" That's all he said at first, just "Mama," and something in the way he said it made my stomach go quiet. "Hey, sweetheart," I said. "Listen, I'm so sorry. Something came up with work. A call I can't move. I'm going to have to cancel tonight." I stood there looking at myself in that cracked mirror. Blue dress, pearl buttons, rose lipstick. "Oh," I said. "Okay. I'll make it up to you, Mama. I promise. Maybe next weekend." "Of course," I said. "Don't worry about it." We hung up. I sat down on the edge of the bathtub. I didn't cry. I'm 85 years old. I've learned that some feelings don't need tears. Some feelings just sit with you in a quiet bathroom while the winter light fades outside the window. I should have taken off the blue dress and gone to bed early with my book. That would have been the sensible thing. But I don't always do the sensible thing. I decided to walk, just a short walk, I told myself. Some fresh air. I'd pass the bakery on Mercer Street, maybe pick up something small for my supper, come back home. I was already dressed. The shoes were already polished. Bellamy's restaurant sits on the corner of Creston and 5th. To get from my apartment to the bakery on Mercer, you pass directly in front of it. I've walked that route 100 times. I was not going to look in the window. I looked in the window, and there was my son, Marcus, my boy, sitting at a round table near the back, the kind they give you when a reservation is for more than 2 people. He had on his gray jacket, the one I bought him for Christmas 2 years ago. He was leaning back in his chair the way he always does when he's comfortable, when he's enjoying himself. His wife, Diane, was across from him, laughing at something. Her head was tilted back the way women laugh when they feel beautiful and at ease. And next to Diane, her mother, Greta, with her silver hair and the particular way she holds a wine glass, by the bowl, not the stem, which Diane had told me once was the proper European way. There was bread on the table. There were candles. There was a bottle of red wine. The dinner wasn't canceled. I was canceled. Before I go any further, if you've listened to any of my other stories, you know I don't tell these things to make you feel sorry for me. I tell them because I've lived long enough to believe that the honest telling of a true thing has value. Subscribe if you want to keep listening. I'm just an old woman with a long memory and not much left to lose by being truthful. Let me take you back. Marcus William Delaney was born on February 9, 1968, at St. Agnes Hospital in Cleveland, Ohio. It was a Tuesday. There had been ice on the roads since the night before, and Raymond had to drive very slowly, both hands on the wheel, while I sat in the back seat breathing through contractions and trying not to grab the headrest too hard. Raymond and I were not a happy couple by that point. We had been married 6 years, and the marriage had been struggling for most of the last 2. But none of that mattered in the car that morning, in the dark, on the icy road. All that mattered was getting to the hospital. What happened next, I don't talk about often. Marcus was breech. They discovered it when we arrived, the nurses, then the doctor, then suddenly more people in the room than I expected. A kind of controlled hurry that I recognized even in my pain as something more than routine. They kept their voices professional and low, but I've always been good at reading rooms. The doctor, his name was Dr. Harold Finch, and I will never forget his face. He came and stood very close to me and spoke quietly so only I could hear. "Mrs. Delaney," he said, "I need to be honest with you about what we're dealing with." He told me the baby was positioned badly. He told me there were complications with my blood pressure that had come on very fast. He told me they were going to have to move quickly. And then he said something that I have carried in my body for 57 years. He said, "I want you to know that our first priority is you, both of you. But I need your husband to understand that if things get harder before they get better, decisions may have to be made." I understood what he meant. Raymond understood. I saw it on Raymond's face, this pale, quiet terror that I had never seen there before, not in 6 years of marriage. I remember looking up at the ceiling of that room. There were water stains in the corner, a long yellowish stain shaped vaguely like the state of Florida. I stared at that stain, and I thought, I am not ready to die, but if one of us goes home, let him go home. Let the baby go home. I don't know if that is bravery or just the particular madness that comes over a mother before she has even become one. They did an emergency cesarean. I lost more blood than they wanted. I ran a fever afterward that kept me in the hospital for 11 days. Raymond brought me soup in a thermos and sat beside me reading the newspaper. And for a little while, just a little while, we were tender with each other again. And Marcus, my boy, he was perfect. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. He had a full head of dark hair, which surprised everyone, and the most serious expression I had ever seen on a newborn. He lay in my arms and stared up at me like he was trying to figure out who I was. I know exactly who I am. I'm your mother. I almost died for you, and I would do it again before I finished the thought. Raymond and I divorced when Marcus was 4. It was not bitter. We were too tired for bitterness by then. Raymond moved to Pittsburgh, remarried a woman named Carol, and stayed involved in Marcus's life the way a decent man does when he knows he's failed at a marriage, but not at fatherhood. I have no complaints about Raymond as a father. As a husband, he was the wrong fit. As a father, he tried. But the day-to-day, that was me. I was a secretary at a law firm downtown for 22 years. I wore good shoes that hurt my feet, and I smiled at attorneys who didn't always deserve it. And I brought my lunch from home in a paper bag every single day so that I could put money aside for Marcus's college fund. I walked him to school every morning until the 5th grade, when he informed me, very seriously, the way only a 10-year-old boy can be serious, that he was old enough to walk alone now, and that some of the other boys had noticed. I stopped walking him to school, but I stood at the window every morning and watched until he turned the corner. When he was in 7th grade, he had a math teacher who did not like him. I never fully understood why, but Marcus came home 3 weeks into the school year and told me he was failing pre-algebra, which I knew was not because Marcus was bad at math. I sat at the kitchen table with him every Tuesday and Thursday evening from September through May, working through problems with a textbook I borrowed from the library because I couldn't afford to buy my own copy. He passed. He more than passed. He got a B+ on his final exam, and the math teacher wrote "greatly improved" on the top of the paper. Marcus brought it home and put it on the refrigerator himself. That paper stayed on the refrigerator until it yellowed. I attended every school play, every graduation, every ceremony where they called his name. When Marcus graduated from Ohio State in 1991, I sat in the bleachers in the heat of May wearing a yellow dress, and I cried in a way that I did not try to hide, which embarrassed him a little. He told me so, gently, later. I told him he would just have to be embarrassed then. He laughed. We were like that. We could tease each other. We had a language between us, the way mothers and sons sometimes do when they've been each other's whole world for a long time. I cooked for him. Lord, I cooked for him. His favorite was my pot roast, slow cooked on Sundays with carrots and small potatoes, and my cornbread made from scratch in the cast iron skillet. He would come to my table and close his eyes before the first bite, the way people do in church. It is one of the purest compliments I have ever received in my life, a grown man closing his eyes over your cooking. He was a good boy. I want you to understand that. Before I tell you the rest of this, I need you to understand that he was a genuinely good boy. He married Diane in 2001. She is a careful woman, precise. She has a way of entering a room and quickly understanding what is in it. I don't dislike her. I want to be honest about that too. I think she loves Marcus. I think she is a good wife to him in ways that matter. But I recognized early on that I was being organized, rearranged, moved from the center of Marcus's life toward the edges in small, methodical ways. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. First, it was the holidays. Thanksgiving and Christmas had always been mine. Then they began alternating. Diane's family 1 year, mine the next, which is fair. I told myself it was fair. Then the alternating slowly became Diane's family more often than mine, because her parents were getting older, because her mother Greta didn't like to travel in winter, because. I told myself it was fine. The Sunday dinners stopped. Marcus had called every Sunday evening for years, a habit that began when he first moved to Columbus after college, just to check in, just to talk. We would be on the phone sometimes for an hour. He told me about his work, I told him about mine. We complained about the weather and recommended books to each other and talked about old times. Those calls became less frequent, monthly, then occasional. When I asked him once, gently, "I feel like we talk less, sweetheart. Is everything all right?" He said he was just very busy, Mama. You know how it is. I did know how it is. I also knew something else was true at the same time. There are things you understand as an old woman that you cannot fully explain to a young one. You understand the difference between a person who is busy and a person who has quietly made a decision about where you belong. I never said this to Marcus. I didn't want to push him further away. So I waited. I held on to the times when he was present and warm. The Christmas visit 3 years ago, where we made my cornbread together, and he had put on an apron and pretended to be very serious about the stirring. The birthday call last year, when he stayed on the phone for 40 minutes. The moments that told me, he's still in there. My boy is still in there somewhere. So when he called 3 weeks before that February evening and said he wanted to take me to dinner, just the two of us, I pressed that blue dress and I bought that lipstick and I let myself believe it. Standing outside that restaurant window on a cold February night, I felt something pass through me that I don't have a clean word for. It wasn't quite humiliation. It wasn't quite grief. It was something older and quieter than either of those. A settling, like the last piece of a puzzle that you had hoped would not fit, but you always suspected would. I watched him for maybe 30 seconds, maybe less, long enough to see him laughing, long enough to see Greta's hand on the wine glass, the bread basket in the center of the table, the easy comfort of people having a meal they had planned and looked forward to. He did not see me. I turned and walked home. I want to tell you something about that walk because I think it matters. It was about 14 blocks. The cold had settled in properly by then, that dry, still cold that Cleveland gets in February, that doesn't blow but just sits on you. My good shoes had a slight heel, and the sidewalk had patches of old ice that the salt hadn't reached. I walked slowly. I looked at the street. I looked at the lit windows of the buildings I passed, people eating at their own tables, watching their televisions, doing whatever people do at 7:30 on a Tuesday evening, the ordinary private busyness of other lives. I thought about the hospital room, the water stain that looked like Florida, Dr. Finch's voice close to my ear saying decisions may have to be made. I thought about Raymond's pale face. I thought about my own face, younger than Marcus is now, staring up at that ceiling and making its bargain. I thought about 22 years of paper bag lunches, Tuesday and Thursday evenings at the kitchen table, the math teacher who didn't like him, the yellow dress in the May heat, the pot roast, the cornbread, the phone call every Sunday. I thought about all of it, and I walked, and I was not crying. I was something beyond crying by then. When I got home, I sat in my good chair by the window, that one that catches the street light in a certain way that I have always found comforting, and I sat there for a long time. On the side table next to that chair, I keep a few things. A photograph of Marcus at about 7 years old, gap-toothed and squinting in sunlight, a small wooden box that holds some old letters, and an envelope. That envelope had been there for almost a year. Inside was the account information for a savings account I had been adding to for the past 15 years. Not a large amount by some people's standards, but a real amount. Money I had saved and invested carefully, meant for Marcus, his inheritance essentially. I had set it up so that he could access it through a debit card tied to the account in case there was ever an emergency, in case he ever needed it before I was gone. He had used it twice, once for a car repair 3 years ago, once for something he called a temporary cash flow issue that turned out to be a vacation that was slightly beyond his budget that month. I had not said a word about either withdrawal. I sat there and I looked at that envelope and I thought about it for a long time. I am not an impulsive woman. I am 85 years old and I have made very few decisions in my life in a moment of raw feeling. I knew what I was feeling right then. I also knew that feelings are information, not instructions. So I sat with it. I let the feeling tell me what it knew, and then I thought about whether what it was telling me was true. It was past 9 o'clock when I picked up the phone. I called the bank. I have had an account with the same institution for 40 years, and they have a line for account holders my age with a real person on the other end, which I appreciate. A young woman named Tricia answered. I told her I needed to deactivate the supplemental debit card on my savings account. She confirmed the details. She asked if there was anything wrong with the card. No, I said, nothing is wrong with the card. I've simply changed my mind about having it out there. Of course, Mrs. Delaney, I'll take care of that right now. And that was that. I made myself a cup of tea. I sat back in my good chair. I watched the street light through the window, and for the first time in many hours, something in my chest felt still. The phone rang at 10:43. I knew before I answered it. Mama. The same word he'd used at 4:17 when he'd canceled our dinner, but a different tone entirely. That earlier call had been smooth, prepared, a little distant. This one was raw at the edges. Yes, I said. Something happened with my card, the account card. It's not working. Diane tried to use it for the dinner bill and it got declined. There was a small silence in which we both understood that he had just told me something he had not meant to tell me. Dinner, I said. Yeah, we went out. I can explain. Marcus. I let his name sit there for a moment. What restaurant? Another silence. Longer. Mama. Was it Bellamy's? He didn't answer. The silence was its own answer. I walked past your window tonight in the cold, in my good shoes, 14 blocks, past your restaurant. And I want you to understand something, Marcus, not as a guilt, just as a fact, the way 2 + 2 is a fact. I waited. I will always be your mother. I will always love you, but I'm not going to keep pretending I don't see what I see. He was quiet for so long that I thought the call might have dropped. Then, the card, Mama, I really need. I know you do, and I need to think about some things. Good night, sweetheart. I hung up. He called the following morning, a better call, quieter. He apologized, and the apology was real. I know the difference. After 85 years, I know the difference between a real apology and one that is trying to recover something that in apologies is not to recover. This was real. He said he had been ashamed to tell me about the dinner because he knew it wasn't right, and that instead of dealing with that discomfort, he had lied, which was worse. He was right. It was worse. I told him I accepted his apology. I meant it. We talked for a while, about his father a little, about the early years. I told him about the water stain on the hospital ceiling that looked like Florida, which I had never told him before, and he laughed, a soft, surprised laugh, and then got quiet again. I have not restored the debit card access. I've been sitting with that decision for several months now, going back and forth with myself about it. I don't keep it locked down out of punishment. I'm not built for prolonged punishment. It takes too much energy and accomplishes too little. I keep it where it is because I think there is something important at this stage of both our lives in him understanding that the things people offer you out of love are not permanent in the way that laws are permanent. They are renewable. They require something from both sides. I don't know if that is wisdom or just the stubbornness of an old woman. Maybe both. Diane called me about 3 weeks after all of this. I wasn't expecting it. She asked if she could come for tea, and I said yes because I was curious and because I try not to be petty when a door is opened. She came on a Saturday afternoon. She sat at my kitchen table in her careful way, and she drank her tea, and she said, "Elizabeth, I want you to know that I didn't realize Marcus had told you dinner was canceled. I thought you knew we were going." I looked at her for a moment. "Did you suggest that I be included?" I asked. She held my gaze, and I respected her for that. "No," she said. "My mother was in town, and I wanted it to be just us. I didn't think about it the way I should have." "I appreciate you telling me that," I said. And I did. It was an honest answer. An incomplete one, probably. There are years of small decisions folded inside that answer. But it was honest. We talked for an hour. Nothing was solved exactly, but something was named, and that has its own value. I've been turning this story over in my mind for months now, the way you turn something in your hands, trying to understand its shape. There is a version of this story where I am a victim and my son is a villain. I don't think that version is true. I think my son is a man who loves 2 women, his wife and his mother, and who has not always had the courage to hold that balance honestly, and who sometimes takes the path of least immediate discomfort in a way that creates much larger discomforts later on. I think Diane is a woman who has claimed her place in her own marriage, as she is entitled to do, but who has sometimes claimed it at a cost she didn't fully account for. And I think I am a woman who waited too quietly for too long, hoping that love would maintain itself without tending, which is a thing I should have known better than to believe. I have been a mother for 57 years. I know what it costs. I know what I gave, and I know what I chose to give, and I don't regret it. Not the pressed dress, or the polished shoes, or the library textbook, or the 22 years of paper bag lunches. But I also know this: love is not a debt. The moment you start thinking of it as a debt, The moment you hold up your sacrifices like a ledger and say, "Look what I gave you, look what you owe me," it curdles into something that neither person can live well inside. I don't want my son to love me because of what I survived to bring him into the world. I don't want him to call me because he owes me Sunday evenings. I want him to love me the way I love him, which is to say, freely, and because of who we are to each other, and because some part of him remembers, even dimly, the particular warmth of being known completely by another person. I don't know if we'll get there. I think we're trying. There are better phone calls now. We had lunch last month, just the two of us, a diner near my apartment, nothing fancy, and he ordered the pot roast from the menu and made a little comment about how it wasn't as good as mine. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing at all. I loved my son the moment I heard his first cry in that hospital room in February of 1968, when I had a fever and the world was uncertain and the doctor had warned us about decisions. I loved him through every ordinary and extraordinary day of the 57 years since then. And I loved him on that February night when I stood outside the restaurant window in my blue dress and my polished shoes, and I understood in the cold and the quiet that love can be very large and very whole and still not be enough to keep a person from making you feel invisible. The thing about being 85 is that you run out of time for pretending. Not for loving. You never run out of time for that. Just for pretending love doesn't require honesty. Just for pretending you didn't see what you saw. I walked home 14 blocks in the cold. I sat in my good chair. I made a phone call to the bank. And then I waited, the way mothers have always waited, to see what my son would do next.